In today's session, I'll talk a little bit about why you need a roadmap. I think we're all, as PMs, super passionate about having one, but it's more than just, hey, that thing that I put up on my website saying this is what we're going to do, or share with my sales teams. How you can get started. I'll touch upon some tools and then talk about what we have as the topic of the day, which is factoring in everybody. So I'm going to disappoint you all and break the news of what I think is the secret weapon, which I really think is having a why. As long as your roadmap has a good reasoning and good data to back it up, I think that's what makes a strong roadmap. It doesn't necessarily have to be in every place you're putting your roadmap, but at least where you can document it for your leadership. Maybe it's just in your head. But as long as you know exactly why you have every item in that list, I feel like it's going to be a roadmap that delights everybody. So now that I've already broken the secret, I'll just go into the real agenda of the day. So first off, why do you need a roadmap? And I think it's just like in everything else, just like with your life, just like with every little thing you're doing, your goals are important because that's where you're marching towards. And that's what your roadmap is. It's your plan of action. It's outline of where you're headed. And it's also providing that context for your work. So you want to know, hey, what is it that I'm doing? Why you're doing it, when you're doing it. So you want to have that vision, the direction, your priorities, and having all of this, having that plan of action, your little outline of how things are ordered, as well as giving context to your team members for the work is really going to also help you in more ways than you can think. So I'll just go through a couple of those things. So we already mentioned your roadmap contains the what you're doing, why you're doing it, and when you're doing it. And there's always a lot of focus on the what and the when, and very little focus on the why. When it comes to something like maybe putting your public roadmap, you would put the what and the when, not necessarily focus as much on the why, but typically that's also backed by your complete roadmap or your full roadmap. And I'll touch upon a little bit when we talk about tools, which contains as much about the, hey, this is my product, this is where I'm headed, and this is why I'm doing this step and this step, which could be something like as little as I'm fixing my UI or I'm improving my developer experience, all the way to the game-changing features that are on there. So we spoke about your roadmap being the plan of action, the outline, as well as the context for work. So how does that help? So first off, it conveys the vision to your stakeholders. So whether your stakeholders, you're talking about your leadership team, your investors, your customers, whoever they are, it's really telling them where you're headed. It's showing that, hey, the product that I have is not just what I have already given to you. And especially in this world where a lot of us are in software product, where it's not just about, hey, I've shipped it. I mean, I bought an iPhone. It's not really changing much except for getting some updates. But when I'm talking about having that vision and having all of it, I'm typically talking just about software product management, where, hey, I'm getting regular updates. The Facebook you signed up for, no matter how many years ago, is not what you're seeing right now. So what you're doing with having that roadmap is also you're conveying that vision, whether it's to your internal, external stakeholders or your team members. It helps you collaborate and build consensus. And I think that's just so important. One of my first product experiences really was when I used to work for Sears, the retail store, and I used to lead their analytics products. Sears was just going into this journey of having technology implemented, and the analytics division was the CEO's pet project. So you can guess what happens with something like that, right? Hey, the CEO's visibility, it's the pet project, and everybody wants to integrate with you. So what I'm building is basically a tool for the marketing teams in order to analyze whom to target and all of it. So you can think of it retail product. So there are lots of inputs coming out and there are a lot of outputs as well. So what happens there is I have teams like the online store who want to integrate with me. And in order to integrate with everybody, I have to do work. There are also other things like we had other data warehouse jobs and things like that. But when I'm looking at it, what adds most impact for me? I mean, we are at that point still a fully physical retail store with very little online presence. And what I want more than all these people who are coming to me and saying, hey, can you do this, is to integrate with the point of sales, which is where the actual physical stores are happening, and get those signals, which is what really tells you whether you want to go and buy that refrigerator more than any clicks online. And how do I make sure I get that right priority, right? So that's also where we're talking about having a little bit of reasoning, pulling the right amount of data. So if I'm able to say, and I'm making up numbers here, don't quote me on these, but if I'm able to say things like 95% of my sales is coming from physical stores, say that's exactly what I need. I have models to back it up to show how the data impacts based on that. That helps me, because then I can make the case of having that investment, convince them. It really helps build that collaboration. It also helps me say no to the teams that I need to push back on, to say, hey, I'm not working on this because at this point, I want to first integrate with point of sales, make our product useful, have it in the hands of the customers, and then talk about integrating other channels. So that's why collaboration, building consensus, those things just make it much more easier once you have your plan of action. It also helps you really figure out what you don't want to do, or you want to do way later, depending on how your adoption is. And one thing I always add in any, even now for any product documents I'm working on or my team is working on, there's always a section where we add about future roadmap. And, sometimes it's just based on what our customer adoption is, we'll evaluate. It could be completely different paths that we're going for. I think we all kind of touched upon keeping everybody on the same page, except it's not just the people who need to talk to you, integrate with you, your customers, but it's really, really any stakeholder of yours. And the last, it helps gain some context for what you're working on. So, for example, it could be for your engineers. It helps they understand what they're doing, why they're doing. It helps them be more motivated towards working on it. And in a lot of cases, it also helps us hire better because there's more context. They know what they're doing, where they're headed, etc. Now, one of the things I'm going to do in every section is also talk about some common pitfalls. And for the first one, I think it's really focusing on more on the what and when rather than the why. So we touched upon that already, but I just want to iterate again on the importance of having a why. And the other is creating a single roadmap for all occasions. I don't mean you have a different date on each view of your roadmap, but think of it just like we think of database tables. You have multiple views coming from the same table. Your roadmap is sort of like that. Your roadmap is that database table, but you have multiple views. And if you try to say, hey, it's a single table with all of that data, you're going to either add too much information, confuse people, or add too little information and not provide enough context. So while you create a single roadmap, you want to have different views for everybody. What your CEO wants to say is going to be way different from what your engineering team wants to see. And hiding the necessary details. What I like to do in a lot of cases is tag levels of visibility in terms of who has to see it, and include just the right level of detail for your audience. That is another, I think, a common pitfall that people have when they try to do a roadmap. So how can you build it? I mean, it's easy to say, hey, we are talking about the plan of action and the outline, and it's the context, and it's that list, but there's a lot of chaos when you're putting a list together, and that's really what it is. To me, it is, if you have your to-do list and the what you want to do and the why you want to do, that really gives you your roadmap. So the first step is, how do you build your to-do list? And I think you can sort of classify it as 3 different steps. The first is identify who you're building it for, typically your customers. Even if it's an internal product, you're really talking with some user of that product. So identifying your customers. Look at what they're happy with. Look at what they're asking you for. Look at what jobs they want done. And in some cases, it's the conversations. In some cases, it's the data that tells you that. And in some cases, it's just, if you are, let's just say that you're building a UI product, it could be as simple as looking at what user flows are not being used. You also want to supplement that with what you are trying to do. You had your vision, you're looking at what flows that or what tasks are not getting done right now, or what tasks are getting done. Then you want to identify your areas of inefficiency. It could be all the way from your operational inefficiencies, but it could also, but really with the focus on your customers' inefficiencies. Clicking through something is taking too long. It doesn't fit into the customer's journey. Look at what alternate paths people are adopting. And you really want to make your product usable and really easy to use, secure, highly available, all of it. So just look at those things and identify areas of inefficiency that you have. And the last is to have your North Star. Where are you headed? To know really that what should your product look like in 5 years' time? What problems you're looking to solve? What is your product strategy and how does it fit in? What's your organizational strategy and how it does? And this to-do list is just your beginning. Your product's unique, you have its needs, and you've now come up with a whole lot of things that you want to do in order to get your product to where you want. Then comes the why list. So you start out with the different kinds of whys. So first off, for every product, you want to be able to fit that into your vision. So where is your product headed? So that could be some of the reasons you're working on something. So we had this big to-do list. Your customers had some jobs to be done. They were probably not getting done. Is that part of your product vision? You want to have that as the reason of why you're doing. Similarly, the organizational goals. In most cases, I mean, unless you're a small startup, yours is the only product you're talking about, your organization may have goals that are different from your particular product goals, and you want to fit that in as well. What is it that the org wants to do? Does it want to focus on helping consumers? Does it want to help? Does it want to focus on really large enterprises or any particular target market? And you want to make sure that your product also falls into that. And the last is the measures of success, as to making sure you know how you would know that your product is successful and what do you measure that by. Once you have that, you can kind of order that to-do list in order to fall based on that. And I know it sounds easy, but when you start doing it, it's not going to be on one dimension. They could conflict. One of the items on your roadmap is going to help decrease the amount of time or increase efficiency for your customer. Something else brings in revenue. But it's really about listing all of it, looking at your measures of success and trying to order things there. And we'll also come to, and the ordering itself could be an entirely different process. We can touch upon it a little bit later, but I think there is really no one answer to that. In terms of just coming up with your roadmap, I think that some of the most common pitfalls is listening to the customers rather than understanding them. I think that's very, very crucial, because your customer doesn't know what could be done. So this is like when you say somebody asks for an apple when all they wanted is, hey, satisfy my hunger, and that would be a better solution. Or I think you might have heard these examples like, making a faster horse versus building a car or having to fly. It's just like that. So your customer is not going to tell you what to do. So you want to basically understand what they're asking as opposed to just listening to them. The second is solving someone else's problem. You usually fit into an ecosystem, and your product's one part of it. And you want to try and solve what is within your your customer's journey, within what your product is trying to accomplish. You don't want to go and solve all of the world's problems, because there are going to be other tools to that. One way of you want to fit in, you want to make sure your product integrates with other tools that could be used in the same process, but you want to make sure you're not solving someone else's problem. And the third pitfall, I said two, so it's a bonus, is not talking to the right people, even when it's at the customer's end. For example, you could just be talking to your sales team who may have misinterpreted requirements, or they may have a different goal. They may be talking really about just one tiny problem. Making sure you're talking to the right people or looking at the right data would also help. I mean, plenty of stories where I could have said, where I can say could have gone wrong. But I think really when you have your vision and you know what your measures of success are, you're listening, I think that can be really helpful. The next, we talk about some tools to create your roadmap. I mean, we already spoke about it, sorting that list of your big to-do list with some reasoning is a hard problem. You want that O and sorting, but that's not what you get here. So I'm pretty sure most of you have come across various kinds of tools that help or prioritization frameworks. You talk about things like having value versus complexity, the reach, buying, give somebody cards or some money and say which feature they would buy, or grouping. So there are plenty of tools out there, and I think a little session can't be exhaustive in terms of what tools are out there even. But I just wanted to tell you what I have found useful. And I typically like to do a hybrid approach where I'm grouping for things and then sorting within that. The actual sort might depend. It could be something like a value complexity or my return or my ROI, but I usually try to do that in groups. For example, you have the little tasks that improve your user experience. There are some things that just reduce time for somebody to use. There are others that are really helping you march towards your vision. And you want to make sure you're showing progress on each of it. The actual amount of progress in each of it might really depend on your org priorities. It could vary depending on anywhere from, time of day, time of year. But having that grouping and making sure that you're making progress in each of these groups is what I've usually found helpful. And within that, you're kind of doing like a cost benefit analysis or using one of the other tools out there. And then there is the where tools, which is again, you could be putting your roadmap into one of the multi-purpose tools or product tools, depending on which teams I've been in. I've used various different tools. I've liked using things like Asana, which lets you have everything in one place, have different views. But then what also happens is they may not integrate into all the systems in your organization. So really look at who's going to update your roadmap, who needs to access it, what it should show, and how it fits into your ecosystem. And you'll find the tools that help. It could be an Excel on a SharePoint. It could be something as simple as that. I mean, but it's really about finding what works for you and making sure you're not updating things in multiple places. You want to make sure whatever it is in a place where you can get different views out of it, or you can extend, you can add those comments and go from there. You don't want to have to write your roadmap in 3 different places and keep it in sync, because I think that's what causes most trouble. And when it comes to the tools to create the roadmap, I think a couple of things that typically go wrong is sort of what I touched upon earlier with trying to rewrite your roadmap multiple times, not having that flexibility. You wrote your roadmap in one way and you have just one view that you can mail out to everybody, but you want that flexibility. And in terms of prioritization too, I've seen some PMs who try to use a framework or try to use a tool because they like it. I mean, if you're somebody who typically likes a, a methodical way of doing things, I mean, you can still develop your own framework, adapt one of these existing frameworks to what works best for your product. And last is factoring in everybody. So easy to forget, but remember, you already have your vision, you already have your goals, and you just want to make sure you're factoring in everybody. Now, who is everybody? You have a lot of influencers on your roadmap. You have your customers, large, small, existing, potential, the whole set. You have your team members, which could be your team, your influencers, all of it, like the design teams you're working with, marketing teams, your engineers, all of it. And then the organization you're sitting in, which could be your leadership, partners, investors, other related products, etc. And in terms of who influences my roadmap, I like classifying it as two different ones. So there are the people who care about, are you doing the right things? And then there are the people who are looking at it as, am I getting what I want? Because they want some control of what is going into the roadmap, and they want exactly that one little thing. It's that user who wants to be able to color that box red, and they want to color the box red, and that's what they really want to do. So what you can do, so you again remember, you have your roadmap, you have your voice, you're communicating your roadmap clearly, you're transparent about what's in there to the extent possible, of course. And for each bucket, you have a different answer. So the bucket of, are you doing the right things? So this includes mostly your influencers, your people like your manager, people like your sales teams, your investors. Most of them fall into that bucket of, is the right thing happening? They don't really care about which feature it is. They don't care about whether it is the box to color red. They want to make sure that the product is progressing in the right direction. And as long as you have the data to back it up, it does not usually matter to them whether you trade off feature 1 for feature 2, as long as you can convince them that feature 2 is very important. And to them, the way you work is giving them the better yes. So let's say your manager came to you and said, hey, we want to work on localization. And you are suddenly talking about, you're going back to them and saying, I don't want to work on localization right now, but they're like, hey, that's an odd priority. We need to make sure that our customers across the globe are able to use it. You look at your list, you look at how many customers across the globe are actually using it, how many are potentially going to use in, let's say, your products currently in English, but in a language other than English, and you find out that it is probably falling closer to a middle or bottom of the list. As long as you can tell your manager that, hey, this is what we are doing ahead of that, it would be easy to convince up the leadership too, in terms of what is it that you want to do. So for this bucket, you really want to focus on giving the better yes and making sure they convince that it's a better yes. It even works with people like sales teams who typically you think want a particular feature, but as long as they're not the end user, they could even be convinced with, hey, I'm not doing this because I'm doing this other thing. And then when it comes to the people who are thinking of, am I getting what I want? You need to find that balance. So you don't want to block somebody. You want to make sure that everybody is unblocked. So you look at your roadmap. Is it really ops heavy? Is it really focused on those two large customers, those two marquee customers who are paying 90% of your revenue maybe? And majority of my career, I've been in platform, and I've even had two sides, which is the sellers and the buyers influencing me. So the sellers want features like more flexibility, whereas the buyers want features like an ease of use. And there's usually a winning side, but you want to make sure you're distinguishing between who are just influencers and who really get what they want. And you want to identify what the true blockers are. So I like using, I'll come back to the previous slide, but I like using both the criticality and satisfaction of each feature to identify what the true blockers are, what features I can use to unblock them, and what scenarios I want to optimize on. So it's really about finding that balance and making sure You are addressing the needs of everybody to some extent, but you are able to optimize for the scenarios that you really want to. At the same time, another thing that I like doing is also making sure that I don't over customize for scenarios. Hey, there's only one customer who wants it, but I don't want to do that if condition. I'm either building this feature or I'm not. Because if this is something that my product should have, it is something that I want to build into the product. It's not going to be a feature that I release just for one customer. And we spoke about the scenarios that you want to optimize. And what I would say is for every product, you typically have the hero and the others. The hero is the use cases you want to optimize for. That's really what you are building your product for. And then there are the others for whom the product should work. You want to make sure it's not breaking for anybody, but you want to make sure that it is as optimized, it's working very well for that hero use case. And in most cases, it may not even be somebody like your top paying customer. For example, when I'm in platform and I'm looking at my long tail, my top cases and like the middle tier, most people on the my top paying customers or my top usage services or sellers, they have the resources to just use my APIs or use something and unblock themselves. And the long tail is, again, there's people who are playing around. You want to make sure they're not turned away, but they can come on board. So my hero could be somebody who is in the middle. But making sure you identify who that is that you want to optimize for would really help. So coming back to what we were talking about, it's really about having a roadmap. Your roadmap's a living document. It's not a one-time update. It's not one thing that you worked beginning of the year, put into an Excel, forgot, and then got lost in that, writing the next PRD after PRD and working on the next tactical thing. It is a living document. Depending on your organization and methodologies you may use, you may not necessarily refresh them, say, to your leadership at each level, but you as a product manager should always have that up-to-date living document. So you want to know your plans, gather the inputs, evaluate, incorporate the changes, and share it where possible. So that's typically what I do with my roadmap. And as we discussed, we looked at why you want a roadmap. We understand that we spoke about you want to understand what your product wants to do so that you're making a better roadmap. You collect everything that needs to go in, you order them, you leverage the right tools where needed, you're transparent, you can be transparent to customers or to stakeholders to make sure what's in there, and you identify that use cases for which you want to optimize and find the balance. So really coming back to, I know what my product should do. Here's the top job to be done. I'm making the best experience for that while not breaking the others. And going from there. I mean, of course, if you had all the time and resources, you don't need to talk about all the balances, but I think that's not a luxury that any of us have at this point. So that's all I had for discussion, and I wanted to make sure we had time for people to ask questions.
Thank you so much, Devika. This was very insightful. I have several questions myself, both from strategic standpoint and also very tactical. But I also wanted to ask our audience, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat, or you can use the Q&A option as well in Zoom. And if you would like, you can also raise your hand, unmute yourself, and ask your question directly. All right. I can just kick us off with a couple of questions while our audience joins in our conversation. But I wanted to ask a more general tactical question. What do you think, or from your experience, is the better timeline for a roadmap? Should it be 3 to 6 months or a whole year?
I usually found a 6-month timeline works well for me. And this has been the case even in places like, for example, when I was at Amazon, we did an annual planning. But what happens is there's just so much that changes in a 6-month time frame in a dynamic environment that we are in, that you want to adjust. So like I said, it's a living document. So you are adapting it, you're making some changes. It's usually just, I'm replacing this line with another or something like that because you have a huge backlog. But I find like doing the full roadmap once in 6 months is better than an annual one. It
And when
could
you
also
do,
depends. I mean, if you are a product that hasn't yet launched, you have a whole lot of things to do, it's probably less dynamic. But especially for products that are live, um, a smaller cadence is typically helpful.
you mentioned that at Amazon you did annual planning. Sometimes it's hard to know what will happen longer than 6 months away. What has worked in your experience for those kind of initiatives?
So first is, and that's why it's important to have that vision. So first is to know where you're headed, collecting the inputs, making sure you know where you're headed, and filling it in. And at Amazon, though we do an annual planning, it's typically a more head count exercise. So having that vision, having those big ideas, the big things you want to execute, that kind of fills that 1-year plan. And for smaller items that you're talking about, like usability or experience improvements, you're usually just trying to fit that in between.
Thank you. We do have a question from Kelsey, which is exactly what I was wondering too. So thank you, Kelsey, for asking. Do you have a favorite roadmap tool? Any reason why AHA is better than Asana or vice versa, etc.? We just make ours in Google Sheets, but I'm curious if these platforms built for road mapping really have a tangible benefit. Good question.
So I love doing it on a version of Excel as well, like Google Sheets, because I think that offers the flexibility. And I've not used AHA, I've only played around with it. I've not used it at an enterprise with larger teams, but I have found Asana useful, especially when you also want to combine it with some amount of project management. And the same goes with things like Jira. One thing you lack in Google Sheet-like model is the ability to automatically retrieve a status from somewhere else, get your collaborators to update things as it's going. These are some of the things that using something like Asana or Jira can give you, where other people are keeping your keeping your roadmap up to date, whether it is about a slip in the date, a timeline, or a description. It could also be easier to do things like linking to your PRDs. I mean, you can add links to your Google Sheets, but things like that. But I totally agree, Kelsey. I mean, the flexibility you get with something like Google Sheet, I just love it because hiding and adding rows, filtering, do a pivot off there to pull things out is easy. But I think most of these tools also have these capabilities once you get used to it, in terms of offering different views, automatically showing that little nice quarterly graph your sales orgs might want, etc.
Thank you, Devika, and thank you, Kelsey, for the question. I had a question that was relevant. You mentioned the where tools and then the how tools, and you did say that we shouldn't, as PMs, get stuck on a specific prioritization technique. But in your experience, do you have a favorite one that you just keep coming back, or do you use a variation or combination of a few?
I've used a combination, and I've also found that it really differs based on the product I'm working on. And the reason I said, and especially the junior product managers I work for, like I've had people who've, like one of the PMs who used to work for me, she always liked it because she is framework driven, and she's like, tell me how to do. I just want that formula to calculate and order it. But as I said, the one thing I keep coming back to is that grouping, because I think you always need to show a little progress for everybody, but within the group, how you prioritize could really differ, from scenario to scenario, product to product, and even within the same product, the way you prioritize, for example, an ops item or a usability item might be very different from that next big thing you want to do with your product.
Got it. Thank you.
And one other thing in the thing there is also, I mean, if you are, for example, and if you're, for example, trying to prioritize based on the return on investment or that cost benefit, you could also just get so stuck in the tactical deliveries and not get towards where you want, which is why I feel that the frameworks could tend to fail, because there's barely any framework that can really translate your vision unless you're that person who's nailed down your success metric so well.